Good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending our webinar on enabling efficient IT change management. I'm Shay O'Connor, and I have two of my colleagues here with me today, Eileen Fitzgerald and Stephen Oxley, and we will be bringing you through the steps and give you some background to change management, and then also showing you how we address that within our organization and hopefully give you some insights into the whole area. Just to let you know, guys, that the webinar is being recorded, and if you need any assistance during this, you can either put it into the chat area on your GoToWebinar, or you can just email info@flowforma.com. Your lines are muted during this, so please, if you do have any questions, put it into the chat area. There's actually a raise your hand option within that area also. So I'm not asking you to physically raise your hand, just tag it there in GoToWebinar. So after all of this, and after we go through everything, the webinar will be shared, and you'll be asked at the end of the whole presentation to provide just a little bit of feedback. It might take 20 seconds, that type of thing. As I said, myself, Shay O'Connor, I'm Head of Solutions with FlowForma. FlowForma is a business process enablement tool that we have in Ergo, and I also have Eileen Fitzgerald, our ITIL expert here in Ergo, and Stephen Oxley is our ITSM service process owner. That's a very long title, but we don't get name badges made from as a result. The agenda for this morning, and we won't keep you too long, is Eileen's going to kick us off with basically answering the question of why is change management important to your business. Okay, so it's sort of your caveat to everything, why you're here in the first place. Stephen Oxley will give you a run around the best practice for change management. And then there's going to be a tag team after that between the two guys, and hopefully they will give each other space to talk for the implementation of the challenges and the recommended approach. And then if you're still awake by the time I get on, I'm going to show you how we actually implement that from in the FlowForma, and how we apply all our logic in a nice, simple, automated process. We'll also have Q&A at the end if, again, if you're not asleep and you wish to ask any questions. Other than that, if you have any questions and you don't want to do it through the webinar, you can either email them, put them through chat. We're open to answer any of your questions anytime. So I'm going to pass you over to Eileen now. Thank you.
Thank you, Shay. Personally, I think change management is one of the more interesting in the ITIL change processes. But okay, so change management. Why is change management important to my business? Now we're going to start off with some of the more obvious examples, and in terms of change management as a preventative control and working to prevent major issues. Unfortunately, for some of the companies concerned, we're all aware with some of the high publicity outages and service outages to some major multinationals as a result of failed changes to their systems. A major American bank unfortunately had a 6-day outage affecting 29 million of its customers due to a project upgrade to an online banking system that went slightly awry. Another major online email provider had a 2-day outage affecting 120,000 users when they went to do an upgrade of their storage software, and unfortunately again this change failed. Another Hotmail, to a 72-hour disruption to most mailboxes, emails lost, and as you're aware, data loss is critical. Absolutely the worst catastrophic change that can possibly happen to an organization is data loss. And this happened to this provider as a result of a failed change. Another bank, again, and this was in our public domain recently in 2012, lost data and lost access to their customer base with an estimated cost of 125 million, not only to its ongoing, but then they had fines after that. So there's some of the worst case examples of how changes and failed changes had a negative impact on the business. However, change management should not be viewed as just a process, a control process, and a risk management process to prevent issues. Change management is not just a necessary evil. Change management in itself can add significant value to the business. So, for example, if you have a flexible change management process, it will enable you to prioritize your changes to the business and ensure that you are focusing your efforts in changing business that are aligned to your business roadmap. IT systems have changed radically, especially in the past 5 years. They are no longer viewed as just supporting the business. They are now viewed as being a critical enabler of the business and business direction. So you want to make sure that your resources and your IT are aligned to your business roadmap. It also facilitates deployment of projects into operations. I'm from a project background and an operational background, and as I'm sure many people are out there, there is always, I suppose, trying to get a project into operations can cause a lot of issues sometimes. So having an effective change management process to deploy into operations and deploy changes into operations will ensure a more effective flow and communication process for when a project ends and it needs to be promoted into operations. Again, risk mitigation by adherence to quality standards and regulatory requirements. We referred earlier on to a bank whose change management process failed, and not only did from a business impact did they receive financial loss, but also they were fined accordingly for failure to adherence to regulatory requirements. And also the visibility of risk. I talk an awful lot, and my colleagues tease me about building visibility bridges into IT operations and showing what operations are doing. Having an effective change management process will provide a lot of visibility into the changes that are being implemented into the organization to support the business, and also enable you to have visibility of the potential risk to your organization and to your business because of these changes. It removes the black box syndrome to changes to the environment. Reducing system downtime, that's an obvious one in terms of, but also in terms of duplication of effort. When you have a change management process, you can look at all of your potential changes and work out what changes need to be implemented concurrently or sequentially, and therefore minimize your downtime without, okay, on Monday we had to down the system to make change A, but then on Tuesday we had to down the system to make change B. Having a consolidated view of all of the changes ensures that you can have the most effective use and maximize any downtime. Again, implementation of change conflicts. I have been in the environment where there was a change scheduled to the infrastructure on the same day that there was a change scheduled to the application that sat on that infrastructure. Two projects, both millions, scheduled downtime, etc., all had to be cancelled because both were trying to make changes to the same environment on the same day. And also, again, consistent and clear communications to the business. I'm going to go back again to the alignment with the business roadmap. They have high visibility into the amount of work and effort and changes being made to the critical IT systems that enable their business to drive forward. Again, huge value in the reduction of the cost of support. Everybody obviously performs regression testing on their systems once they make a change either to an application. However, again, let's say you make a change to an application or an infrastructure, you perform regression testing, and then again on Tuesday you make another change, you perform the same regression test. If you consolidate multiple changes, that means one test, i.e. from a regression test, will help you validate that those changes have not had an impact. Again, you need to be careful with this because multiple changes at the same time it's not highly advisable, but experience and common sense will help you validate this. Consolidate performance testing. Again, if you make changes, you have to do performance testing to realize the impact of it. This will help you reduce the cost of that testing. and also remedial actions. We keep going on about downtime, change implementation, etc. So therefore, to reduce your support costs by reducing the amount of remedial action required if a change goes wrong, if there are issues with changes. So these, again, it's a very quick high level, but a lot of people view change management as a necessary evil. Having an effective change management process in your organization can add huge business value by ensuring prioritization of changes to align with your business roadmap, reduce the cost of support, reduce system downtime, and ensure you make the most effective use of that downtime. Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. I'm going to pass over now to Stephen Oxley, and he's just going to go through what his experience has shown to be the best practice for change management.
Thank you, Shay, and thank you, Eileen. There are undoubtedly many objectives of change management, but the primary objective would be to eliminate change-related unplanned downtime. The management of change in an organisation is primarily concerned about the management of risk, to reduce the risk exposure by the business caused by changing components of your IT services. So there's a question to ask is, what's the probability that this change will go wrong? And what's the impact of the business when that happens? Many organisations, particularly risk-averse organisations, would ask that question at all parts of the service lifecycle. So when designing a business service, they'll have resilient and redundant business processes. When designing the architecture, they've got resilient infrastructure, and the IT service is designed in such a way to enable change management of those IT components and to reduce the impact of change when it does go wrong. If it's the business requesting a change, then they quite quickly become engaged in the change management process. They're often happy to sign off on the level of risk of that change. But when the changes seem to be driven by IT, engagement from the business reduces. Okay, they're not quite so keen to get involved. Are they happy to sign off on the level of risk that change might be introducing? And when it goes wrong, they immediately go from being slightly dismissive or unengaged to very engaged and often hostile when that change, when the impact of that change is significant. So we need a process to reduce the ongoing risk to the business created by changing the infrastructure and the systems. When it does go wrong, it's the change management process that's responsible for minimising the severity and impact of the change. And then the change management process is responsible to initiate the incident management process, whose responsibility is to communicate the impact of the downtime to the business and to then restore the service as quickly as possible. Ideally, change management's objective is to implement the change successfully at first attempt. Secondly, change management policies. This is really important. It's important when you're designing your change management processes to start by defining the policies. Okay, these need to be established and need to be aligned with the business and is relative, I suppose, to the risk appetite that the business has. So risk-averse organisations, being banks or pharmaceuticals, may have a lot of change management policies that are very strict. Those companies that aren't as that can accommodate an increased level of risk may have looser policies that's appropriate to the business. If your organisation, for example, has an audit or compliance department, they'll need to sign off on your change management policies. Your processes will fall out of the policies that you defined. If you ever get audited, if your change management processes get audited, the very first question the auditor will ask is, can I see a copy of change management policy? And their objective is to confirm that your processes are complying and reinforcing those policies. So your policies really are trying to create a culture of change across the organisation, driven by ensuring that the changes create business value. And then how do you measure that value of that change? It's important to detail how you prioritise changes. So where there is a change conflict, okay, there needs to be a policy that says change A is more important than change B. Perhaps change A is innovative and change B might be a defective, change to reduce a defect. You need to be able to understand which takes priority. Your change windows, it is here in your policy where you may decide to document your change or maintenance windows, so it's clearly defined. And the policy will also establish accountability and responsibility for the changes that throughout the service life cycle, so who owns them. And that leads me on to the roles and responsibilities, defining those, making sure that they are very clear. Okay, you need to make sure that people who have an input and an interaction with your change management process, they know about the process and they know what their role and responsibility is in that process. Okay. So, what are the key components of the ITIL change management process? I've listed a few here. Okay. We'll start with change request. Okay. This is sometimes referred to as the change record or the change form. It's where the change management process starts. It's where the change requester initially documents the change that they're looking to make. It's also where it ends. So once the change has been implemented and your post-review is completed, it's where the output and the success and the evaluation of that change is then stored. It's the repository of all you need to know about that change. For major changes, you may not be able to physically get all the data information into that change record, but it needs to be, it's where you start, and it's from there that it leads to all the documentation. So what does your change request include? Okay, now it's not limited to, and it'll be relative to your organisation, the type of information you want to capture, but it needs to have a unique reference number. It needs to identify the change requester's name, the category of change, the risk level assessment, okay, of the change to the business. It needs to describe the change. It needs to identify the service asset. So is it an application you're changing? Is it a server? Is it an IT service? It needs to identify the business unit impacted, and it needs to identify the expected and estimated downtime caused by this change. Now, some changes may have zero downtime because of the way that the infrastructure is architected. Some changes may have a planned downtime. It needs to have a proposed implementation date. So what date and what time are you proposing to make this change? So the duration of the downtime is the time from the proposed implementation date to the end of the estimated downtime. It needs to have an implementation plan, a backup plan, and a test plan. For major and significant changes, these may be quite detailed. Okay, so but it's the change record that you go to find out where that information is kept. Okay. The change review. This is sometimes referred to as the peer review. It ideally needs to be workflow driven, and you might find that who peer reviews the change is dependent on the type of change or technology or business unit that change is impacting. It's also an excellent opportunity for cross-training and knowledge transfer within your team. So being able to get someone else to review a change, its detail, its accuracy, and its plan. Change approvers. Changes can be approved at CAB, I've got more on that in a second, but low risk changes can be approved by and authorised by change approvers if appropriate. Why go to CAB for a change or swap out a hard disk in a RAID array, or make a cosmetic change to a website, for example, if those changes are deemed low risk? What's key to this is a documented and approved workflow appropriate to the change. These change approvers will ensure that the change is aligned to the maintenance windows and will be responsible for avoiding conflict of changes. Having agreed maintenance windows with your business for each IT service can help reduce the chance of conflict. CAB, okay, CAB is often misinterpreted in the business. CAB stands for Change Advisory Board. It's a forum for evaluating and approving changes. Often it's the change manager that chairs the CAB meeting. Sometimes the CAB meeting itself is a physical meeting. It's a structured physical meeting that occurs on a regular basis. Other times it doesn't have to be that. It can be a virtual meeting. It can be a process of approving changes through an email trail or through a workflow. CAB's not a technical forum. It's the final review and approval stage for changes. Change implementation. Now that the change is approved, it's the responsibility of the change implementer, but may not be the same person as the change requester, it's probably worth stating, to implement the change at that particular approved time. Implementing a change at different time to that approved by CAB or by the change approver essentially makes it kind of an unapproved change. Okay, why have that process? Why go through the review and approval of the change if then the implementer doesn't implement it as agreed and at the time agreed? The post-implementation review. this is really important. So many people miss this out. Okay, so once the change is in, whether it was a success or whether it was unsuccessful, it's important to review the change, because that creates your feedback loop and improves the quality of your implementation plans going forwards, and enables you to address and assess any adverse impact of change. Your change log is nothing more complex than a list of all approved changes and their current status. So you can go back and look at all the changes, what business unit was impacted, what IT service was impacted, all your open changes and all your closed changes. Your forward schedule of change. This is sometimes referred to as a change calendar. It's a calendar view of all the scheduled changes, sometimes sliced and diced perhaps by technology or business units. It's primarily used to manage change conflict and for the business to understand their risk windows. So even if there are maintenance windows that are approved with the business, you may not be making a change during those maintenance windows, but instead what this enables you to do is identify to the business and flag the period of time that they may be at risk. They may decide in response to their risk window, and if it's an increased perceived level of risk, they may decide to change some of their business processes. So if you're making a change to an online website, a business may decide to increase the staffing levels in their call center in case something goes wrong. Okay. Best practice takeaways. So I pulled together a list of kind of ITIL best practice takeaways. Eileen's going to cover these towards the end and summarise them in the recommendations, but I think it's worth including those for notes as these will be distributed. Okay. You'll sometimes see the 7 R's of change management documented. Okay. I'm not going to go through them in particular detail, but essentially it's you ask the question in order to assess the change correctly. Who raised the change? What was the reason for the change? What is the return on this change? So how does this benefit the business? What are the risks involved in the change? What resources are required to deliver the change? And also who's responsible for the build and implementation of that change? And what's the relationship between changes?
Now, just before we go into that, that's like speed change management.
It
there,
is.
a hell of a lot of
is.
information. But just to reinforce a major comment that you called out, your change management process needs to be aligned with your business.
Absolutely.
So, Stephen, you just added a lot of detail on that. Absolutely fantastic. But again, the change management process has to suit your business, your regulatory requirements you're operating in, your appetite for risk, and whatever change management policy you have, make sure you can show adherence to it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, guys, thanks, Stephen. Thanks a million. Nice to have an expert around me. Eileen and Stephen are just going to go through the implementation changes and recommendations now.
Okay, we touched on this. Okay, so create a lean and efficient change management process. It's a challenge. Having a process that's too cumbersome, too bureaucratic, will only lead to poor adoption of that process and compliance with the change management process, policies. The right level of risk, the right and appropriate level of process can be a catalyst for change. I've always argued that change management is an enabler of change. It enables you to make the right business decisions when it comes to IT change, but also it protects in some way the change requester and change implementer, because they've gone through a process where they've had their peers review their change, they've had sometimes the CAB review and approve their change. So if it goes wrong, it provides them with a level of security and in order to make that they've followed a process to make the change. So in that way, it promotes engagement with the change management process. The culture of an organisation is really important, and this needs to come from the top down. Establishing approval authority. The right level of people need the right level of authority to approve the change. Make sure that those authorised to approve the changes have the authority to do so. Ensure you meet your regulatory requirements. Make sure you know what those requirements are, and that a lot of the time, if you have an audit department, compliance department, they can advise you on what your regulatory requirements are from a change management policy and process perspective. Ensure compliance with the process can be a real challenge. Make sure you've got the KPIs to measure how you are complying with the process, who's following the process and who's not, and that you can measure your success of change management. You need to integrate your vendors into the change management process. This will help you reduce the impact to your business of their changes. Okay, so not only do you get visibility of their changes, you can put those and you can include those in your forward schedule of change, but you may get the opportunity to make a change approval decisions and push back on your vendors enforcing changes upon you. Automate, automate, automate. That's going to be that's a key message here. Have the right ITSM tool for the job, so it's important to facilitate the process. Change management itself can be implemented as a standalone process, but why would you? Best practice requires and promotes that it's integrated into other processes to be fully effective. In particular, incident management, problem management, and configuration management, some which may be less mature from a process perspective and require improving and uplifting in order to meet the requirements of your change management process.
Now, if we look at some of the recommendations, obviously unfortunately a lot of the recommendations are very closely aligned with some of the challenges. So if we start off here in terms of ensuring your change management process and workflow is highly automated and can integrate with other key service delivery systems. Now, we alluded to earlier on that your CAB is associated with risk management and it's a change advisory board. Ideally, your CAB is not there for purely technical review. This should obviously have happened prior to these coming to the change advisory board. In a large organization, your CAB may consist of functional heads from different departments in different areas of expertise. So therefore, any technical review of the proposed change should have been adequately reviewed, approved prior to it coming to the CAB. Likewise, your CAB, our change advisory board, these are people who are authorized to make decisions and qualified to make decisions. Therefore, they are normally senior people within the organization. Hence, holding a CAB meeting can be very expensive because these people are expensive resources. Therefore, you want to ensure that the workflow to getting a change to the level of a CAB, A, is automated, so it happens by a background in prior to coming to the CAB, that there is already an approval process associated with the change. So therefore, those people who are approving this can see, i.e., who it's been reviewed by, who supported it, done the peer review, done the functional change prior to it coming to the CAB. So therefore, have as many of the approval processes, etc., done in the background prior to it going to the CAB. The CAB can be an incredibly expensive meeting for your organization, so you need to make sure it is as efficient and as effective as possible. Now, when you have changes, ensure you have two types of change at a minimum. You have your standard change request, but the reality of the situation is that there will be times where you have a service outage and therefore you need to implement a drastic, radical change to ensure that the business is back online. As my colleague Stephen alluded to earlier on, change management process is about change enablement, not stopping change, it's about enabling it. And there will be times where you cannot wait for the correct authorization, where you need to do something to get the business back up and running. Hence, have a process within your organization for an emergency change. Again, you can have a process where, okay, in certain criteria, and have those criteria very carefully defined. A change is authorized as a potential black change, where it's registered post-change implementation, or else the approval cycle is fast-tracked, and there is a mechanism for dealing with this. But again, understand that it will happen, unfortunately, and have a mechanism for dealing with it. Now again, when we get back to the reporting after this, if you find that you have a high level of emergency changes, you may find that it's the same people all the time seem to view things as an emergency. So have very clearly defined criteria for this. Ensure you can tailor your reports to suit your target audience. Again, and I skipped on there actually, I must say, You will have multiple people who are interested in changes. You will have quality who want to review the impact of changes. You will have technical departments who want to look at change review. So have a flexible solution so you can slice and dice your information according to those who you are reporting back on. Now again, I've mentioned earlier on that you want to keep your CAB as efficient as possible. You may find in your change request that you have multiple changes that are repeat changes, okay? I had an organization once where firewall changes, we had about 20 of them every week in the CAB. Okay, this got to the stage where it became a standard request and was moved. It was repeat, it was the same process every time, it was the same procedure, it was low risk. It was decided in this organization this was low risk, so therefore it was moved out of the CAB. So if you've got multiple repeat requests that are constantly coming up, look at if you can move them to the request fulfillment process and denoise the change process. Keep the change process as efficient as possible and reduce the noise on it. And also in terms of KPIs, have some key KPIs, key performance indicators to measure your success. Again, you have to have a feedback loop in your change process to evaluate the change of success. Otherwise, you're not learning. So you need to embed continuous improvement into your change management process and have a loop back to evaluate the success of your change so that you can constantly evaluate how you can improve your changes, how you can speed the resolution time. Stephen alluded to earlier on in terms of the downtime, the estimated downtime associated with the actual downtime. And this need not be at the system level, it could also be at the service level. Okay? And then there's some KPIs. Again, these are relevant to your organization and need to be relevant to your organization. I suppose there's the agreed time to implement change would be one. Downtime, estimated time to implement change, and actual time, the difference between the two of those. Again, the level of automation associated with the change, the time from the CAB. How many times a rollback has been initiated? We alluded to earlier on that you need a rollback plan for your change if your change goes awry. Or do you actually capture how many times this rollback has had to be initiated? And again, the amount of emergency changes you have. If you have a high amount of emergency changes, there's something wrong in your organization. It may not be with the change process, but it could be with your monitoring, for example, or your configuration, okay? But that would be a key feeder as well into other processes within the organization, and also the change success rate. And so they're just a few of the KPIs, but again, all of those would be aligned with your business requirements, with your regulatory requirements. And I'll leave in one note, because I know we've got a huge amount of information here. Your change process is an enabler to your business. The level of complexity and the level of rigor you need to go into has to align with your business, your regulatory requirements and appetite for risk. But if you have a change management policy, you need to be able to show adherence to that policy. So I would keep it as simplistic as possible for starters and then add on as you grow it out and develop. Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen and Stephen. Now, sorry, moving on from the experts and over to me, there's no point in telling you all about change management within an organization without the fact that we do it ourselves. So we've implemented this within our organization and other organizations, but we just wanted to show you our example of how we deliver this. We're basically using our tool FlowForma, it's a product, and just to give you a simple background, there's one slide just on the product. It has a forms building, questions engine, business rules engine, document generation facility, all within the one product. It sits on SharePoint, fully integrated with Office 365, and can be integrated with all of your databases. It also has an atom feed from it so that you can report on any of the information that you would have gathered within any of your processes. So basically it'll take an input of any business process. In this case, we're going to concentrate on change management. Okay, you can see my screen there, guys. This is just a simple landing screen within FlowForma, and I just wanted to show you how, again, we go through our change request process. I'm going to pick here. Now, this is our change request, and basically when anybody needs to add in a new change request, they click on their option there, and you get to see at the top you have your header, and across then underneath you have a list of all the steps within your process. This screen and the steps, it's all dynamic, so it's based upon your rules. You can either include or exclude certain steps. As Eileen referred to earlier on, for example, if you have an emergency change request, you may want to circumvent a few of those steps and get proper clearance to actually break the process or skip along the road to get a faster solution or a faster agreement. Within each of the steps you have what we call our list of questions or fields. We call them questions because you can literally do anything with them. You can have any action behind them. I'm just going to pop in very quickly and show you a simple entry screen, and category. All of these drop down lists, etc., are all dynamic as well. They can be cascading. You can decide to change this list on the fly, and I'll show you an example of how to do that. I'm just going to put in a service, simple service change here. I'm going to say that every business unit is affected, and that it is, in this case, I'm going to say it's a, say, server A. You can, again, this is a floating list. You can decide to add other components that are other options. And I'm just going to say that a new server farm introduced. Okay. Now the impact change, very important. I'm going to say that it's a high impact because all of the business units are affected. I'm going to say that's going to take me, say, 10 hours for the whole thing to complete. I'm going to schedule it for a Sunday because we work around the clock. I just won't be doing it, and it'll be finished again on the Sunday, and say that night. Okay, you can upload your implementation plan, put in descriptions, etc. All along here you can actually have tips as to from a training point of view what should or shouldn't be added in. You can then, in this case, put in the risk associated with a change. I'm going to say that's a high risk because everything is down. That means everything might not come back up again. Now I'm just going to submit that. But before I proceed with the rest of this, as you can see, I get the technical review, step 2, and so on. I can decide, yes, I'm going to accept this, or I'm going to say no, and it'll ask me for a reason for rejection. These screens are dynamic, so we don't want to clutter up any of the screens with unnecessary questions that may not need to be answered. It also, when you're going through all these steps, it totally enhances the whole change management tool of automation. I can link to other processes. I know exactly where each of these steps go, because each one of the steps has to go to a resource, be it a group or an individual. I'm just going to close this for a second. I'm going to show you in the background how this comes about. It's really simple to alter and very, very simple to apply any changes. This change request process has actually got 8 steps to it. Now, as you can see, this is our actual process. So I can decide that this isn't relevant for you guys, and I'm just going to hide that. Automatically that's hidden, that's fine. And if I save that and close, the next time I pop into the process and I want to put in a new change request, that step is now gone. So it no longer appears in my process, but I can re-engage it quite quickly and quite easily by just popping back into the process and re-engaging it. Also, I can have the dynamic nature of this. I can decide I'm going to make that, okay, I'm going to leave that invisible. But let's say the technical review, I'm going to also make that invisible, but I'm going to make it visible if I ask a question whether technical review needs to happen. So I'm going to click on a new question here. I'm just going to say technical review, question mark. I'm going to make this a yes/no field. As you can see here, I can select any fields I want or any type of fields. So I'm just going to make it a yes/no at the moment. I'm going to save that. Now, that appears on my list here. I can move that up within and place it wherever I like. So I'm just going to place it near the top and put it in here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rule into this. So with that step, well, I've already made this hidden, the technical review step. But I might decide I'm going to add a review or add a question or add a rule here for this review. I'm going to say, going to hide show a step. Now, as you can see, you can do all sorts of rules. You've got data integration, you get very sophisticated. So I can start linking to other systems on the fly, get list data and so on, can set permissions. So it can get very dynamic and very precise on where my flow moves. So in this case, I'm just going to hide show question or hide show step. So I'm going to say, in this case, if technical review equals yes, then I'm going to show a step. So I'm going to go, this technical review shows. Great. So the next time again I go in, change requests. Again, here are all my steps. The ergo step is gone and technical review is gone. But if I said that I need a technical review, it pops in. So the whole thing is dynamic. Now, I won't go through all the fields that you're going to require in this, but suffice to say that all of the authorization levels are being touched upon at each point and each relevant point. You are in control of this. So this is going to be your change request. You may start off with a template like ours and then decide to adjust it. But the reality is we work with lean methodology in mind. So the whole collaboration, the whole visibility and optimization of your process is all within your control. You can decide parallel steps can be, you can decide which steps are parallel, which are consecutive, etc. It just reduces the whole waste area. But all that information is gathered on my, for example, here are a list of my change requests. I can decide to just look at my high risk requests, etc. So that's simple SharePoint functionality. But I can go that step further and I can use the likes of Power BI, for example, and I can decide to have a look and say, right, here are my service requests. I have 93 hours worth of requests that are service related, service categorized. I've got 25 hours of change requests, and then I actually have 4 emergency ones. Now, which is a bit severe, but I can also then do it by risk level. So I can say, where are all my medium ones, all my high ones, and I can see, okay, who's it for, what's the duration, when's it requested. Now, I'm just cutting the data around here. I can decide to do it by date as well, so I can decide to see this month, next week, on what day are these outages required, and then I can manage it correctly. As the guys are saying, I can align all my high ones, or I might have a look at some of the medium ones and see that they're associated with the same product or the same application, and say, right, we'll put all of those together and decide that on that day all of the jobs get done in one go. During this whole process also, I'm going to just show you, you have a facility within the system, it's automatic, that you can have SLAs around each one of your steps and each one of your processes. In this case, I'll just concentrate obviously on our change requests, but you can have basically all your processes here. At the moment, all my change requests are on time. That's marvelous. But if I have a quick look inside that, I'm going to be able to see that within each of those steps, At the moment, the requests, the initiation of the requests are fine, but in technical review, I'm starting to have delays. So some of the individuals in technical review, unfortunately it's me, have not done their job and have not gone through that review step. Because each time you are meant to be involved in a process, you're notified. So you can be notified by your desktop and notified by email. But you're notified that you need to step in and provide information at each level on this, or each time, or each step in your process. So just popping back here just to finish off on the FlowForma element. All of these areas, the way it looks at the moment, these are all automatically created for you. All you need to know is what are your steps, what questions you need to answer in those steps, and your screens are automatically created. So again, we are going by our own mantra of reduction of time, and we don't want to waste our time. So we want to do things efficiently, but we don't want to waste time on them. Okay. I'm just going to flip back. Now, we do actually have one question at the moment, and from Scott. And Scott asks, as best practice, should you consider user adoption and/or acceptance within your change management process, and where within the risk matrix should this be prioritized?
I'll take that, Shay.
Okay.
Sorry, in terms of should you consider user adoption and
acceptance.
And acceptance.
So, yeah.
Yeah, with any process, user adoption is incredibly important, and acceptance as well. And as Shay showed there, you can see, you can view as well. Now, just to reiterate the user adoption perspective as well, is you start off with a policy, and then you have a process, automated process obviously, to support this policy. As part of your policy, you need to have clearly defined approvers within certain roles. Now, again, with FlowForma, what we have is when you are administrating in the background, you predefine who your approvers are depending on the information. So it can dynamically build or automatically send an email to an approver. So then you can look actually, and in here you can obviously see who's taking it up and who's not. But user adoption is incredibly important. Training is incredibly important. And when you're training people on the process as well, it's very important to enforce the rationale and the value of the process, what value it brings. So that when you're training people on the process, it's not this is the process A, B, C, D, E. You need to enforce very, very clearly what value this brings to the organization while we are introducing this process, how it can help people, how it can add value, and how it can add benefit. And yes, then as you're introducing the process, keep an eye on adoption, your approval cycles, what's on time, what's not, etc., and your efficiency. One of the ones I found years ago was the peer review, the technical peer review. Without ensuring an adequate peer review versus somebody going to their colleague, oh, John, could you just sign this off because I need to have a peer review. What happens is by the time it gets to the cab, the technical questions have not been answered, and therefore you're not making the most efficient use, and it gets pushed back again then until the technical questions are answered. And that is inefficient time, and it's an inefficient use of people's time. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Eileen. If we have any more questions, great, but at the moment we don't. So I do want to thank everybody for attending. We, just to reiterate, we will be sending out this webinar to all attendees, and you can, if you need something to put you to sleep, you can listen to it again.
See, I think this is fascinating, Shay, honestly.
I know,
Change management.
Yeah. Damien from Nexus is asking, can we use FlowForma for other IT processes in the organization? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is our mantra is the lean methodology, and having centralizing your processes having pure visibility of the process and optimizing as it moves along. So when you're doing your activity monitoring, so you can see where you have bottlenecks, etc. Always the best thing to do is to start off with an initial process. Make sure that it beds down well. So for example, this change management is perfect. Every place does change management. So you can start off with something like that. Once it beds down, you know exactly how it operates, and you can align other processes along with that. So you can start linking processes to your change management. So it gets a bit like a spider's web. But the nice thing about it is that it's fully audited. It sits on SharePoint. The Microsoft guys love us because we make sure that you use SharePoint correctly. And if you align your libraries, etc., with your processes, you don't have to worry about your auditing and so on. As Eileen was saying earlier on, when auditors come in, you can point them exactly to where all your requests are sitting.
Yeah.
You can create the documents behind these change requests, so you don't just have to have it on screen. You can create a document on the fly in the background that is held within the change request library, all ready for auditing. So yeah, Damien, thanks for the question, but yeah, you can use it for every process.
Yeah, and I would reinforce as well, obviously the key one would be for asset management, configuration management. If you have a CMDB, the change management process integration with that would enable you to keep track to changes to service assets. That would obviously be a key one. Or even incident management, where you can keep track of incidents relating to changes, etc.
Okay. So another one is, will it support mobile? Yeah, we're launching our 4.1 version at the end of this month, and it is fully supported initially on iOS, so all your Apple devices and your Android devices. But yes, it's fully supported on mobile, so you can answer your questions on the fly. So if I've no other questions, which I don't think there are, thanks again for showing up, and hopefully it was insightful. If you have any questions, guys, and if you wish to sort of investigate a little bit more, you can just email us, contact us. Some of you know can contact us quite easily and know where we are. We can offer you sort of an ITSM benefits analysis. The guys will check out what you need or don't need to do. You could be perfect, you never know. And then also from a FlowForma point of view, from the product, we can also offer you a proof of concept. So if you have something in mind, be it change management and any other process, we'll be only too delighted to see what you need to do and give you a hand and put in a couple of days and show you what the system can do for you guys. So there are two things there. Pick both or pick either. It's up to you. Thanks again, guys. And keep in tune, for we will have more webinars to come.